Very pleased to be joined on this episode of the Warning Podcast, 237 days until the presidential election, by Faiz Shakir, who is one of the original founders of Think Progress and is founder and executive director of A More Perfect Union. And he ran Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential effort in the 2020 campaign. How are you? Welcome.
Doing fine, Steve. Good to hear from you.
Faiz, let me ask you about More Perfect Union and the mission ahead, specifically over the remaining 34 weeks of this campaign and hopefully transitioning into the next administration.
When you think about the modern media environment, we're trying to build an advocacy journalism organization that speaks for working class people from the perspective of working class people. And I worry about the modern media environment, Steve, where you're having the emergence of more and more outlets that speak to small niches of high income earners, right? The good, well-natured outlets, but the models are find your Substack and speak to 20, 30, 50,000 people who make a lot of money and sustain an outlet. And what that means is you lose scale. You lose the voices and the impacts of real, regular working people and speaking to them and deriving your stories from them. That's my mission in life, is to say, hey, let's reverse the way in which most outlets tend to get their stories from people of power, privilege, and wealth. Let's go into regular people's lives. And I think if you look at this next upcoming election, it is those people I think who are going to help determine the outcome of it. When you go to Wisconsin and Michigan, Pennsylvania, and places like that, Nevada and Georgia, you're talking about working class people who are wondering, does anyone speak or see or hear my concerns? And it isn't as if they're asking. I mean, their bar is quite low, Steve. It's not as if you got to solve it tomorrow. Just tell me that you see it and that you care about it and you're working. Right. And if I think there's an allowance there on their part to say, if you see it, you care, you're working on it, you're going to fight for me. Okay. Then we can work together. But if you don't even see it, how the hell do I know that you're on my side? And so one of my jobs, and hopefully our jobs at More Perfect Union, is to elevate into discourse those conversations that tend to get a lot of attention. Like, did you know a lot of communities in America can't get clean water, for instance? And it's a major thing that affects people's lives. Just decent clean water. Hospitals shutting down in rural parts of this country. Small farmers kind of having a hard time making it. Do we see them is the question. And I want to make sure we do.
Let's talk about the progressive movement in America. And let's talk about it on a horizon of the next 12 years. Not the next 270 days. And I'm going to lay out something beyond the labels, but let's look at Mark Zuckerberg as our case study. Person's worth many tens of billions of dollars personally of net worth. He's bought most of an island in Hawaii. He's building a $265 million estate with a underground bunker. Has made the money on the power of the algorithm, and now wants everybody to wear a mask where they can opt completely out of reality with the computerized images over our head. And so whether it's him, whether it's the small cabal of billionaires that decide we are going to build utopia in Solano County outside of San Francisco, whether it is the 1,000 billionaires, the 40% of the country that doesn't have $400 of cash available. When you look at the people at the top, Elon Musk, there's a very easy case to make that these people are not on your side. Not on your side. And they live a life apart in a society apart. What does the progressive movement have to communicate to working class America in a new way that reinvigorates the movement? For example, we'll talk about the tax code in a moment, but let's talk about how in language, how does the progressive movement reach out, right, and begin building of a new coalition as we imagine a world post the baby boomer presidential era?
For decades, Steve, there's been a compact in America that as we invested, as small businesses invested, large businesses invested in towns all over America, that workers would benefit from that, that it would be mutually beneficial. And that compact is eroded to the point where that compact may fully break. We are now at a juncture over the next 10 to 15 years with the onset of artificial intelligence, virtual realities that you are referencing, where you can see the possibility that large profit makers, large companies, the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the world, could institute a new set of businesses that generate profit and have very little to no workforces involved in those businesses. And I want everyone to think and reflect on what kind of future that is and what, more importantly, it matters to humanity. What is the essence of being a human? That's really, I feel like we're at that question. Because if you are now being asked to stay home, to do nothing, to get maybe a check and not have any work in your life, right? Is that the theory? Is that it? I happen to believe strongly that work means something to people. It brings dignity and respect and a sense of meaning and a purpose and a mission. And if you start to erode that, as has been eroding for 40 years, you see the degradation of human existence right there. And I think we're at this point where as people make determinations about the future of workforce and the future of profit-making entities, you got a position in this economy where because we all know the wealth and income inequality has widened hugely. What people don't always remember and associate with that is the power dynamic has also changed in that way. And therefore, the people who might make decisions over the next 30, 40, 50 years of human existence are really so far and away different and apart from working class people. And I worry greatly about that. And it's going to require solidarity efforts. One of the reasons I care deeply about unions is we got to put power back in the hands of regular people who say, no, if we're going to talk about the future of trucks in America, driverless trucks, if we're going to talk about the future of robots in warehouses, if we're going to talk about the future of electric vehicles, I, as a worker, somebody who finds meaning and purpose in life, want to say in this conversation and want to talk about the needs for me to live a life of respect, of decency, of dignity, that matters. At the end of the day, your profits are not the only thing that matters in this damn world. We got to think about the condition of the human.
Let me ask you this, and I think it's important to visualize this. People talk about it, people make on the comment section of my platforms, imagining a Trump victory. We're going to have a lot of rhetoric in this campaign talking about this is the most important election of our lifetime. I believe that is the case. Once again, we have found our way to a higher face card than the last one, which was fairly existential in my view. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to imagine what happens if Trump wins. People will talk about it will be the end of democracy. But in reality, democracy doesn't extinguish like a light being turned off on a switch. I think I read recently, and this may be off a bit, there's 94,000 elected bodies in the United States at a governmental level with statutory authority of some type. And so extremely complex society. But imagine if he wins, right? We're going to be in a period of extreme revanchism with a collection of unqualified, dangerous weirdos, some of the most corrupt people that will have ever served in government, and a sense of profound entitlement that comes from victory, that we can do anything, flush with power, before they get ground down. The most dangerous thing that Trump talks about, that any of the people around him talk about doing, in my view, is the idea of sending National Guard from red states into blue states, federalized as some sort of quasi-Trumpian occupying force in the name of emergency that doesn't actually exist. To me, right, that is real. That could happen, and it will be very, very, very dangerous for the society. But how do you see him coming back into power as somebody who would be deeply involved in the opposition? Do you personally have fear of being targeted, being persecuted, in any of this for being outspoken, being investigated, being prosecuted, having family members harassed? Does, your skin color weigh into that at all, your ethnic background? I mean, how do you think about all that?
I mean, certainly in the 16 campaign, it did feel like because of his vitriol and language on Muslim Americans, it was, it felt personal, right? That it was almost, if he could see me, it would just be a slap across the face because it didn't feel as if he respected that I care about America, I care about this country, I want it to succeed. And I don't know what he's got in store for a next election. I'm sure, some of the concerns, they make sense to me. And I try not to live in that space because I want to engineer a different outcome. And that's what drives me really, is to say, hey, we got work to do to get a different outcome. In terms of the psyche of Trump, Steve, you and I know that he cares so much about feeling like he's got a movement behind him. And that's what makes him a populist. That's the thing that to some degree I have like more appreciation for, is like someone who's trying to build it on the left, that you speak to real people care about you. As we all know, that it means the intensity could be high, but maybe the breadth of that may not be a majority of Americans, which is why I'm surprised to learn that the vast majority of Americans are not on his side when people turn out the voting booths, but he has high intensity. And I think the question is like,
Mhm.
those I am pledging for myself, regardless of what the environment is, I'm going to be an engaged citizen. Like I know that what happened from 2016, 2017 onwards was starting with a women's march and engaged citizenry of like people power, that actually had effect during his 4 years as president, when he had to deal with the fact that there are large numbers of people out there agitating against him and against his direction. The second, I mean, I think what people like him like and want to see is that strongman has come into power, and we're going to just essentially beat down the opposition. We kind of make you sit at home, sit on your ass, and not do anything about this. And sometimes for a lot of strongmen, that's their conception of what the American people want. That, hey, you put me into power, I'm just going to wheel and deal here, and I'm doing it without any pushback, because that I'm coming in to solve your problems and do it in a certain way. And our job is to just be a constant public presence. I think it matters when you're thinking about a populist on the right, that you remember from the inauguration onwards, right? The psyche that he had to deal with, the people agitating constantly in a public way against him, really, I think, did have an effect on his presidency, would again. And I think that's where my head will be at, is how do we continue to have an engaged, active citizenry mobilization, not just of like protests, but like of a direction of a country, so that engaged citizenry is not only kind of nationally telling a story through its volume of people turning out, but also arming governors and local elected officials, people with authority and power in different respects in American life, to have the courage, judges, to stand up and be tough and courageous. I felt during the Trump presidency, a lot of judges found backbone and actually stood up to him, because they knew, hey, there's a lot of people outside my courtroom. There's a lot of people watching this, and I gotta follow my conscience. Again, it's those moments where you're like, yeah, we're not going to let you forget your conscience, dear people in power. If Trump doesn't have a conscience, fine, but there's a lot of you who do, and that's our job to pressure defense secretary or pressure whoever it might be to say, oh, we're watching.
When you look ahead, who excites you inside the Democratic Party, inside the progressive movement, next generation of leaders and candidates that are that are coming down the pike.
I'm waiting to be excited, Steve. Let's put it that way. I want to be excited, so I'm hoping and leave myself open to be excited. I mean, there's obviously people with different approaches, and one of the things we're going to see is what kinds of approaches to politics are going to win out over a period of time. I think you and I are having this conversation where I'm oriented around core and working class politics and economic justice fights, and that's where I want to see people lean as a top priority. And I get that certain people are in different places. We're going to have this debate out in a democratic way. It's interesting to see some of these governors, right? A lot of different places, from Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Westmore in Maryland. You got, J.B. Pritzker is interesting in Illinois. You got Newsom, of course, Gretchen Whitmer. Then you got members of Congress. I've always been a, eager follower of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and seeing how she figures out her own politics and the years to come and what she wants the national audience to know about her. It'd be interesting for me to watch as she came from a working class background. I like those types of people. And then I'm actually interested, I'll tell you, Steve, I'm interested in the people outside of politics. Like one of the most interesting figures to me right now of this modern age as a progressive is Shawn Fain. Shawn Fain is the head of the United Auto Workers, the first democratically elected head of the United Auto Workers. For a long time, it was non-elections. It was picked by closed door rooms. And now here's a person of the people, and you can see that in his policy. Led his workers on strike, right? His union on strike for many, many months, and got outcomes.
And
got outcomes that have improved the lives not only of people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but he's also working on. If you look at the Southern organizing, Alabama, Tennessee, maybe South Carolina, the future of those states could look very different.
So top line, you look at the race, we know who the nominees are. Third party candidate, Robert Kennedy, talking about Aaron Rodgers as his vice president, maybe Jesse Ventura. He's in the mid-teens. He's been as high as 25, 26%. Let's just say his kind of chip in the campaign, let's call it 20%. How do you see this thing playing out over the next couple of months?
Well, you started with the main worry that I have for this race, so you're on the same thing that I'm on. And the first question we have to ask, Steve, is he going to be on the ballot? That's just a practical matter. Can he collect the signatures, get them certified, verified, and appear in particularly critical states that you know well, right? We're talking about Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia. By some indications, there's a couple things going on here. One is he's focused on trying to get into these states, and it's actually not him personally. This is one of the interesting dynamics about this. It's not RFK for his own campaign. It's an outside super PAC. An outside super PAC that both did the Super Bowl ad, as you well know, that they also are now getting out there and collecting the signatures to get him in onto the ballot in key battleground states. So what does that tell you? Who is this super PAC? Who's behind the super PAC? It's pretty fundamental questions. And it turns out that there's a number of conservative donors who happen to be more aligned with Donald Trump who are behind this effort. And I think if you just analyze the game dynamics of this, they see it as beneficial to Trump if he can get onto the ballot in some of these battleground states. He peels off enough votes. I think you and I would probably agree that Trump has a ceiling and a cap on how much support is out there for him in a lot of places. So all he's trying to do is tear down that Biden number and have them either stay home, peel them off to third-party candidates, dissuade them, whatever he needs to do to just drag votes away from Joe Biden. So that's a quick take on it, but wonder where you're at.
Does it matter to you at all when you observe this situation about his name? That you think about it, right? It's like Martin Luther King III, right? Like imagine him going off the rails, right? I mean, it's like you're talking about a name in American politics that for a lot of Americans, I'm not sure it's, we beyond John Kennedy Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr. is a big name, and there's a big difference between the two men. I mean, how do you engage him? Because how do you engage him?
Right, by public
strategically?
polling.
How would you think about it?
To get to the thing that I think you're putting your finger on, if you look at a lot of public approval polls right now, RFK is outperforming basically most near all politicians in America. He's got a very high favorability, very low disapproval, which suggests that, to your point, people know a name. That's why if you looked at that Super Bowl ad, for instance, run by the Super PAC, it did not mention any substance of any kind. It really just reminded you that he's got a name. It would be like the Bush family or something. Here's another person that you've known well from a lineage. And so what you have to deal with is fill in the blanks. There are obviously some people out there who know him for a vax position or, some outlandish views that they disagree with. But by far, the vast majority of people have no idea who he is and only know his name. And the question, the challenge for Biden allies, Biden campaign is how much do you try to educate people about the areas with which you think he's out of step with the mainstream of America? And it could work against you, right? Because he's got low identity, but as you do more to help him, then obviously you could find that he starts to solidify a 6, 8, 10%, whatever that number is in key states. And you don't want that happening either. To your point, what we're hoping is that over a period of time, for those of us who support Joe Biden, that the RFK number goes down, down, down. He's more like Gary Johnson. For those of us who remember Gary Johnson's third-party candidacy, it starts maybe at 9 or 10. It starts to come down, down, down to the point where it's not really the major factor in the race. Or it could be like Ross Perot. For those of us who remember Ross Perot, where you keep a number that ends up becoming meaningful and significant to the race. And I think it's a tough question, Steve. I don't. You got to do at some point some education around him if he's going to be on the ballot, stay on the ballot, and be in critical places. People need to know who he is, what concerns people should have about him. Not only that, if you're throwing your vote in a certain direction, if you cast it for him, that I think people will intuitively get. Truly, the question is, what does he stand for? Is he aligned with your value set? Is he not? And I don't think the vast majority of Americans people know the answer to that question. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for Joe Biden is he's making a case of kind of continued progress in a direction that is unfulfilled. And to the extent that there's dissatisfaction about it, you're saying that's because my job is not yet done here. Let's keep this ball rolling, and convincing people that the ball is rolling in the right direction with his hand firmly on the steering wheel, in which he knows exactly where he is heading. And so I hope that, over the few months ahead, he makes that. My own view of Joe Biden, his big, strongest case, one of the reasons I'm a full supporter of him, is that his great project is the unrigging of America's economy. The unrigging of America's economy is what he's after, making it work for working people. And on that, I just see it. We go down a whole set of issues where I would probably be a little bit bolder than he is. And he's making tactical judgments about where votes lie and what he thinks he can get across the finish line and where judges can agree with him. He's making these tactical decisions, but he's moving and sees the same thing, feel like I see and a lot of people see, is that this unrigging of America's economy is fundamental.
When you look ahead in this campaign, next big event is the vice presidential pick by Trump. I'd bet my left arm that it will be it'll be one of the lady MAGA stars, governors or whatnot, almost for sure. And then after that, we're going to come into the conventions, and we have a Democratic convention in Chicago, and we have a Democratic convention in Chicago while a war is going on between Israel and Iranian proxies in Hamas, where the casualty count, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, is north of 30,000, with more close quarter combat underway. If you look back politically, right, and you just said on October 8th is a matter of politics, that is going to take 100 days, right, or 120 days for Bibi Netanyahu and for the president to be in open political and policy warfare, right, across global media, right? The party divided. I'm not I'm not sure a lot of people would have said, yeah, that's going to happen, but here we are. When I look ahead, I see two grave dangers um, for Biden. The first is this issue inside the Democratic Party that just blows apart the convention and creates this patina of chaos against a strongman candidate. And then the second issue is the immigration issue. And when we think of immigration, we think of failed states, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, Syria. We tend to think of them on the other side of the world. We have a failed state that's devolved into abject anarchy that apparently is controlled by someone who is burning his political enemies alive and feeding them to stray dogs named Barbecue. And this island has 11 million people on it. It's 800 miles from Florida. So you had immigration on the Mexican borders already a fraught issue, a worrisome issue just politically for Biden. This will become a new crisis, layering on top of that the poorest Black people in the world, by some dimensions, and absolutely in the Western Hemisphere, making for South Florida. But before we talk about what to do, are there other issues that you look at beyond those two that you just kind of fall into your category of, oh boy, volatile, unpredictable, who knows what's going to happen, situation could worsen, right? That war could escalate, 100 different permutations of it. Any other issues, or do you disagree that those are the key danger issues for him as you look at it right now?
I mean, right now as we speak, it's easy to flag those ones as the major ones. I tend to think that as campaigns go on, you and I know, you get a crisis that exists out of nowhere. Right now, there's a slow moving, slow rolling crisis of, pharmacies across America shutting down because of a cyber attack on United Health / Optum, and it's causing a lot of damage to a lot of people's lives. And there's not a lot of political discourse about it. But I think of, you lived through a period in 2007, 2008 when, at the latter stages of that, we remember, here's a financial crisis that hits and it changes the dynamic. I don't think it is not crazy to me to think that in the way in which corporate America has so much dominance over America's side, that something like a cyber attack on United Health or something along those lines, Boeing, right? If you get into that, some massive kind of issue arises in which people turn to government to say, hey, help us solve for this. Give me a trajectory, give me a firm hand on the steering wheel and tell me how we solve for this problem. And so I can imagine that could happen. But besides that, Steve, I'm with you.
It's funny you talked about Boeing. Let's talk about the politics issue. You talk about somebody who has been, really labeled in the national media, rising star in Democratic firmament, Mayor Pete, now Transportation Secretary Pete. Looking at it cold, calculatingly, cynically, politically. Boy, if I was Mayor Pete, I'd want to be out of that job like yesterday, right? You have a big crash, right? The amount of accidents that have been closed, catastrophes narrowly avoided, near misses, nearly averted on an antiquated system, ripe for a lot of finger pointing, where there's been no investments made, where we're doing it out of the 1970s in the AI age.
But behind the scenes, Steve, Mayor Pete, now Secretary, has really sunk his teeth into this job in a way that I think most people maybe have not seen or heard. Like he's had to deal with, as you mentioned, airline crisis. In the heat of it, we had literally, as you remember, a meltdown in Southwest and a poll during the height of it post-pandemic, literally on Christmas Day, shutdowns of airplanes. It was crazy. You had rail disasters, like punctuated by
Yep.
East Palestine. And as you say, you got Boeing, and each turn, to his credit, I think we would all acknowledge he came into this job without a ton of transportation experience. And all you can hope and assume and want for somebody is get in there and figure it out and care about it and do some stuff to help people. And he has changed the trajectory of the transportation department in a big way. Right now, Boeing is on a 90-day window where they have to report to the FAA on any safety protocols that they are now doing to ensure the safety of the public. DOJ has initiated a criminal investigation into Boeing. And for Mayor Pete, Secretary Pete, if the idea is like, what accountability measures are you gonna have? It's a tough one, right? Because now you're thinking about immigration, Gaza, now Boeing. These are fundamentally policy. You got to show me, if you're going to convince me, you got to show me some actions and moves. And quite frankly, Steve, when you iron them out, as I would argue he did on a lot of like the airline kerfuffles, you had air prices going down, smoother air travel for generally. But we're still on the cusp because we got a broken system, too few air traffic controllers, whole variety of problems. But he's on the case and he's ironing out. You won't get the credit when you start to iron some of these things out. And so this question for those of us who do politics is to say, how are you both trying to solve for the policy, but communicating something to the public about what your value system is and what you're trying to do here. And on that score, I would urge, this heavy amount of people want corporate accountability. You screw up, Boeing, I want to see some damn accountability for you. And he's got the opportunity. So I would flip it back on you, Steve. Was that like, if he came forward with a pretty strong corporate accountability effort against Boeing, it would turn a lot of people's heads.
I think that this is such a vital aspect of this next chapter of American life, and a badly needed, renewed accountability politics, a responsibility politics. Call it a second coming of the progressive era movement, or whatever you want to do. But what you just said uh, is foundational and runs through all of these issues. And again, it's basic economics and incentives. If you can make more money by cutting out a step, smoothing out a process, bending a procedure and a rule, which is what Boeing has done fundamentally, right? Then that company is going to do it over and over again. And the question is who's on your side? And and I say this all the time. What Trump is humanity's most gifted philosopher of fuck youism,
Yes.
right? He is its world champion, right? You have a lot of people who look at powerful interests and want to give him an FU. It's well deserved, and Trump is their vessel.
On
But
that point, Steve,
that's an empty calorie.
I did this analysis a little while back, and a lot of people don't know this about Trump, to your point, like, because we know his policy, he never really follows through on the things he says. He just says a lot of things.
Right.
But if you go back, there are really many large corporations in America who haven't been on the receiving end of a Donald Trump diatribe. Like, we could go through Boeing, Coca-Cola, you go through Nabisco, you go through some of the large corporations in America, Kellogg's, whatever. At some point in time, Donald Trump has attacked them. And when you look at a lot of the working class people who are on the fence, you say, there's a president of the United States attacking my boss and trying to change something, right? Like, that's a dynamic that I think does work for him. It just happens to be that he doesn't, like, he'll attack big pharma, as we know, and then not carry it through to actually doing anything about it.
Right.
Here comes Joe Biden. This is the irony of Joe Biden, right? So you got the carry through on a lot of these things, often understated, so that they're not animated for the public and people don't really know that he's taken on big pharma in a big way. And then Trump carries the politics of it. So what you're actually asking is, Donald, for Joe Biden, is to say some of these things that you've been in, like the heat of battle against major credit card companies, against major pharmaceutical companies, against big banks, they are pissed with you. Chamber of Commerce hates the stuff that's going on against Joe Biden, but we're not getting the political benefit because he's not out there saying, I'm taking these guys on and I welcome their hatred. And it's part of because of the way that Joe Biden does his politics, right? Tends to be a genial, amenable, find the middle, common ground, understated. I'm not going to do heated rhetoric. but I think it does leave on the table sometimes the animation of what you're actually doing and why it matters.
The person of the year, right, in America domestically was Sean Fain. I mean, he had more impact on more people's pocketbooks and wallets than any other American directly, and he did it with guts and conviction.
I,
Wouldn't wait,
People
and
watched his
that's how you
tactics
make progress. And he wanted the fight,
totally.
picked the fight, and won the fight.
And
And
was
Americans
absolutely
love that.
strategic about that fight. Knew
Yep.
where he was going, knew what levers to
Yep.
pull, got the administration on his side. Oh, reopened a factory in Belvidere, Illinois. I mean, amazing things that happened. And as a result of his work, Boeing really, there's a Boeing union right now that's negotiating a contract. Their first offer was 40% wage increase. You know why? Because they watched Sean Fain, right? Like there's a lot of people he's had down ticket effects here where a lot of people watched the way in which he did business and it gave them courage to say, yeah, let's change the ballgame. Instead of going into a negotiation for a 5% increase, 6, 7% increase that we historically have done, let's fight for a different trajectory like Sean Fain taught us to do. And I agree with you. He's had a huge impact in the economy in a healthy way. I would argue, obviously, small thing.
Absolutely. No question. I do think that one of the points you raised that's an important one, and I think about this, is that we have a minor leagues in politics for the presidency that says that there's room for senators and governors, and consideration can be given to one or two strange characters per party, right, that run from outside the system and may make for good fodder on the debate stage. But I just saw on a CBS Morning interview that Steph Curry, who's written a children's book, deeply involved in literacy issues in Oakland, is asked a question about politics. He says, yeah, I'd consider it if I could make a difference. And at the end of the day, if I was to disqualify any group by group, right? I guess if you're going to make me do it, I'll disqualify the U.S. Senate as a group. Right? None of you people can ever run again, right? For president, right? And we'll make up for it outside the system. But there's a lot of people doing a lot of things with a lot of conviction, who have vision, who have knowledge, who have broad experience in life, been all over the world, seen a lot of things, who just don't happen to have been elected senator or governor, who we might not want to throw away any possibility of drawing on their wisdom to lead the country out of the morass it finds itself in.
You and I have led presidential campaigns where, I tend to think the modern presidential campaign requires a few elements now more so than ever before. You really have to be a charismatic individual. The demands of you to be a nationwide spokesperson is just so pressure filled in a major way, unlike even before, right? And in that way, to be on TikTok, to be on whatever formats. I don't want to pick formats here, but whatever formats, you got to be able to be present and out there a lot. And I think I tend to think you got to be a populist. You got to be of some kind where you generate enthusiasm. It's going to get harder and harder to be a candidate who's like, I'm a competent governor, not very charismatic. I do things and, try to manage, but don't have an intensity of support. I kind of think that might be a hard road to hoe for the future. I mean, I don't want that because I want competent people. Let's say an Andy Bashir, good example, right? Kentucky governor, good, kind of won in a red state, interesting, case to make. But in order for some people like that to succeed, my own thinking is you're going to have to find a way to generate intensity and conviction, particularly in competitive primaries, right? And you think of an AOC, like I think she could generate, right, for those reasons. But that modern presidency, the modern presidential campaign is changing under our feet, and those are the qualities that I would highlight.
We're going to see some really young candidates in this next election cycle in their 30s, late 30s, early 40s that nobody's yet heard of as we move into 2028. It's going to be a lot of change in the years ahead in the country. We are coming to the end of an era, no doubt about it. And you're going to be one of the people who's shaping the next one. So it's great to be able to spend some time with you today. Thank you very much.
This was a pleasure, Steve.
You bet. My pleasure. Thank you for listening to my political commentary. If you like what you heard today, please also consider subscribing to The Warning daily newsletter on Substack.